Hey everybody, and welcome to the Halloween episode of the Cinema Psych podcast. I'm really excited to do this show. We're going to have a little bit of fun messing around with the time of year. I hope you noticed the subtle intro music that we did. I thought it was going to be fun. I'm going to mess around with some other editing techniques this time around too, so keep an eye out for that. I hope everyone also hears that we have changed the bumper to something kind of spooky. So we're going to get right into this episode. We're going to get right into it. But before we do, like, subscribe, follow us on social media, please. You know, wherever you get your podcast, that would be lovely. All right. My guest today is Dr. Randy Stein. Randy is an assistant professor of marketing at the College of Business at Cal Poly Pomona, which is in, wait for it, Pomona, California. He has a Ph.D. in social psychology from Yale University. His work includes, with me, of course, your one and true host here, on topics like how people differ in their views about reality, how that relates to political ideology and personality assessments. And then we have a great new paper, which Randy will probably plug at the end of this episode because I'll prod him to. A newish paper on issues with the one, the only Myers-Briggs type indicator. Randy, say hi.
Hello, and welcome to the listeners for this very special spooky edition of Cinema Psych.
Yeah, spooky edition indeed. Now I'm going to have to do like one for every friggin' holiday.
That's right.
I know. All right, Randy, you brought a special film with you today, but before we get to that one, let me ask you a couple of questions, because you're not actually a psychology teacher. How dare you, by the way?
I am a social psychologist, but not a teacher of psychology.
Right. Yes. So I'm going to change up my questions just a little bit, and I think this fits with the discussion that we're going to have today. So first of all, I ask this of all of my guest hosts. What do you love about film? And how does being a psychologist change your relationship with film?
So I think it's changed it quite a bit. And I think, I don't know if you'll relate to this, but kind of being a social psychologist changes your relationship to probably pretty much everything. And I look at film primarily as entertainment. And what I enjoy out of it is watching a writer or director, their vision come to life. And I think what maybe changes how I view film compared to other folks who aren't psychologists, and maybe compared to other social psychologists, is I don't really turn to film for messages. I don't really turn to film for lessons, because it's fiction, and I kind of feel like we have the empirical work of psychology for that. So rather than looking for messages, I kind of just look for, I really enjoy interpretation of meaning. So like one thing I really enjoy doing is like, I like Kubrick films, but not really for what he's trying to say, but just like how he's saying it. Like I like 2001: A Space Odyssey. I certainly will enjoy having conversations about what the monoliths represent. But if he's trying to make some point about how, like, we're going too far with technology, like, I'm just like, yeah, like, cool, dude, but you're just a guy, so who really cares what you have to say about that? And the other thing that I think has really changed is, like, I've kind of given up on the idea that there's some correct objective way of viewing anything really, but especially film. And kind of like the way I see it is like, we kind of the way that we view taste, including physical taste and taste in music and art, is we're kind of there to let our beliefs about those things fill in how we feel about them. And like, we're supposed to be biased. And what I always do is, because I know, like, feelings about movies and music and food and everything else is supposed to be guided by belief. Like, I kind of try to suspend what I think about a movie until I read a few reviews and watch a few YouTube videos on it. And like, once I get that context, that really helps a lot. And to bring up our film, the first time I saw it, I kind of had this "what the hell was that" kind of reaction, and it wasn't until I really read some more about it that I convinced myself that it was actually amazing. But I had to get there, and I think that was me just kind of like using the psychology of belief to be like, all right, like once I have the right context, once I'm watching this the right way, then I'm going to like unlock what's awesome about it.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up today's film because we are probably on opposite sides of it. I'm going to be kind. I will be kind, but yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting take on film that we haven't really explored, right? And man, oh man, what would you have done with this before YouTube?
I probably just would have thought it was dumb and then moved on with my life, but
yeah, maybe because the reviews at the time would have just been like, Roger Ebert or somebody, and it would be non-spoilery or anything like that. And so it would be kind of like what they thought of it.
Yeah, reviews were not good, and as a lover of this film, I love it, and also as a psychologist, I'm fine believing multiple things at the same time. I love it, but you know what? Those reviews are still right.
That's fair. All right, Randy, what film did you want to discuss today?
So today we are discussing the 1979 cult classic horror movie Phantasm.
Phantasm.
Yes. Which stars A. Michael Baldwin as Mike, Reggie Bannister as Reggie, Angus Scrim as the Tall Man, among others. And this is a very amazing film. It was made on a budget of about $300,000. It made about $12 million at the box office, so a very, very big return on investment. As we alluded to, critics were not kind to it at the time. They probably still wouldn't be kind to it in this time. But for this kind of like little film that could, on a relatively small budget, it has had a pretty big cultural impact. It kind of existed before a lot of the horror film cliches were in place. One of the themes is nightmares, and the Freddy Krueger film was in large part inspired by it. There's a few scenes, particularly one involving a small killer orb, which I can't really explain more than that. That's just kind of is what it is. That's been very popular, and probably the biggest way it's impacted pop culture in the newest Star Wars movies, those unofficial fan fiction films that have been put out by Disney. The character Captain Phasma is named after Phantasm because J.J. Abrams is a big fan, and in fact put together the remastered version of it a few years ago.
Right. Now, like I said, I am on the opposite side of the liking spectrum. I am with the reviewers on this one. Before we go any further, I do want to give a spoiler warning because we are probably going to dissect the whole thing in a certain manner of speaking. So if you are a horror fan who wants to be surprised all the way throughout a film, then I suggest pausing now, this podcast, going and watching, and coming back and listening to the rest of this podcast, because we do have some great insights. But I am not a fan of this film. I watched it for the first time to prepare for this episode with Randy, and I was gobsmacked.
It is a gobsmacker.
Yeah, it is. It's a gobsmacker.
It smacks you in the gob.
Yeah, so I am not, I did find some good psych concepts in it after thinking about it for a little while, and then, doing what Randy suggests and going and reading analyses and that kind of thing.
Part of what's interesting about horror movies is you kind of have to know how to watch them to bring up again that like you need to have the proper context, and like you just can't watch it expecting a Kubrick movie or a Christopher Nolan movie. Like it's just not that. And I think a lot. But
I wasn't even comparing it to Christopher Nolan or Stanley Kubrick as far as horror. I was trying to say, okay, where's the poltergeist element? Where's the exorcist element? Where's the crazy doll element from recent years, or like the Amityville horror or the Blair Witch Project? None of that grabbed me.
Okay, interesting.
But yeah, we're gonna go through it. We're gonna go through it. So Randy, I'm gonna let you go ahead and jump in with some of your big takeaways for this film. Set people up for success when they're watching this.
Yeah. So I guess the spoiler people might have turned out by now, but we actually know from social psych that spoilers actually increase enjoyment, which makes sense because it's because of fluency, right? When you know what's coming, it's easier to process. And I think it actually helps.
I don't want to get yelled at by people who are like, you didn't give me a spoiler warning. So, spoiler warning.
Spoiler warning, but keep listening because spoilers are good, right? So here's what happens in the movie in 2 minutes, and kind of like how I'm watching it and kind of like working through the train wreck. So it does have that train wreck kind of appeal, and the original cut was about 3 hours. They chopped it down to 90 minutes, and you can kind of tell that there's some like leftover characters that like they just sort of pop up 3/4 of the way in. And it's like, who is that? Like, as we'll see, like who is Myrtle? So anyway, so here's what happens. So it opens with a sex scene in a cemetery, right? Like any good movie should, right?
Don't mess around in cemeteries, people.
Well, apparently not. So the guy that looks kind of like Bing Crosby on a bad day, he gets killed by the woman that he's with. Not that any of the kids listening know who Bing Crosby is. Excuse me, David. And actually, I'm screwing up because it's David Crosby, not Bing Crosby. What am I saying?
Very good. Very good.
So David Crosby is killed by the woman that he's with. We cut to his funeral. We're introduced to Jody and Reggie, who are the two older characters. At which point it becomes very, very clear that like if there was a Wikipedia article for just like the concept of the director didn't want to hire real actors, so he just hired his friends, like the picture of Reggie would be right on that article. So they're at the funeral, and the big introduction of the tall man, Jody, enters the mausoleum, which looks great. Like for a low budget movie, there's a few things in it that look great. The mausoleum is one of them. Jody's 3-piece blue suit is also one of them. The clothing in general in this movie is great. Yeah. And he hears some strange noises. The tall man approaches him for the first time in the movie, tells him the funeral is about to start. And we cut to the cemetery, and we're introduced to we hear for the first time, we hear about Michael, who's going to be the main character. And we hear that Jody and Michael are brothers. We hear that their parents died. We hear that Michael has been having nightmares for weeks. Hint, hint. Turns out that's a hint. You don't know it at the time. Right. So what's really interesting one of the things that's interesting about Michael's character is he has absolutely no supervision. He's 13. And he has no supervision whatsoever. He is driving cars, driving motorcycles, drinking, and no one cares. He's just doing it, right?
I think that's another hint, right?
Yeah, that certainly could be. Like, there's an unreliable narrator kind of aspect to it, and like, how is he?
Yeah.
And they drive what's become an iconic. I believe it's called a Hemi-Cuda car, which is iconic in the horror community. So Michael's spying on the cemetery. He sees the tall man single-handedly lift this casket. He thinks that's strange. We kind of just cut to this scene of an old lady. There's this old woman who lives with her granddaughter, and the grandmother doesn't really say much. She has Michael put his hand in a box that appears out of nowhere, and no one's really fazed by this box appearing out of nowhere, which is kind of a recurring theme. So anyway, as the plot unfolds, Michael starts visiting the cemetery. Again, he just like kind of drives there. The tall man starts stalking him. He follows his brother on a date. His date also starts having sex in a cemetery. These dwarfs start chasing them. Michael winds up getting attacked by the tall man in the mausoleum. And in one of the great scenes of the movie, the tall man is chasing him, and Michael winds up cutting off the fingertips of the tall man, and it starts spurting all this yellow blood. And in one of the great moments, and I guess this is part of like the negative reaction. Michael takes home the finger in a box, and he shows it to Michael, like as proof that this strange thing is going on. And he shows it to Jody as proof that this strange thing is going on. And Jody opens up the box, sees this like disembodied finger in this pool of yellow stuff, and he closes it, and he just goes, "Okay," and that's it. And that's just kind of like yeah, and that's just kind of how people react. So they resolve with Reggie to go to the funeral home to try to kill the tall man. They wind up in this strange room where there's all these barrels, and you're kind of waiting the whole time for some kind of explanation of what's going on, like who is the tall man, like what does he want? And there's these two like metal poles, and Michael just touches them, and he gets pulled in. And this scene looks great, as bizarre as it is. He gets pulled into this strange world where he sees all the dwarves like toiling on this red planet. And Reggie and Jody pull him out. And in what I guess can only be described as the explanation of what's happening in the movie, they say, Michael says, I figured out what's going on. They're using the dwarves for slaves. They got to crush them because of the gravity and the heat. And this is the door to their planet. And that's it. Like, that's the explanation that you get. Like, this tall man guy is like taking people from our planet, quote unquote, crushing them to be dwarf slaves on some other planet. And that's really all you get. Right. So they escape. They basically trick the tall man into falling into a mine in the least convincing death of a villain in horror movie history. They just throw rocks on him and then leave, as if that's going to do anything. And in the final scene, we find out. So Michael wakes up and he's talking to Reggie. And actually, basically what they try to convey is that whole thing was a dream. Jody has also died. And since that happened, Michael has been having all these nightmares. Reggie says, let's just go on a field trip for a couple of weeks.
What do you expect? You've hardly slept since the funeral last week.
I know those rocks aren't going to hold him. First he took Mom and Dad. Then he took Jody. Now he's after me.
Mike, that tall man of yours did not take Jody away. Jody died in a car wreck. You had a bad dream. Now, I know you're scared. But you're not alone. I'll take care of you. I know I can't ever take Jody's place, but but I'm sure as hell gonna try.
Seems real.
You know, partner, what we need is a change of scenery. Why don't you and me hit the road for a couple of weeks?
Where'll we go?
Well, I don't know. I guess we can figure that one out when we get there.
Okay.
Well, get on upstairs, get your gear together. Let's leave when the sun comes up.
Michael goes upstairs to his bedroom to get his stuff, and he closes the door to his bedroom. He sees the tall man. The tall man delivers the trademark boy. Boy. And these mysterious hands just pull Michael into a mirror. In another, like, hard to describe it, but it's actually one of the best shots of the film. And it just kind of ends. It just ends there, right? So it's never entirely clear what's going on, aside from, like, it's all variations of a nightmare that this kid is having, right? Some members of his family have died, his parents, maybe his older brother also, and he's just kind of nightmaring / hallucinating this tall man guy who is out to get it.
Yeah, let's pause on that for just a quick second. So the end of the film shows you, is trying to tell you that it was all a dream.
Yeah.
In this case, we would call it a nightmare.
Yeah.
And, you know, that maybe that was a dream within a dream. It's kind of sounds like a recent episode on this podcast
It sure
where we
does.
talked about Inception.
It sure does.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. When I finally got to the end of the film, I'm like, huh, okay, all right. And so we don't know. There are 4 other sequels to this. There are 5 films in this Phantasm
that will
thing.
Simultaneously explain and confuse you more. So
right. And so if we just take Phantasm by itself and not any of the sequels,
which is, I think,
the end of the film is ambiguous. Yeah, we got to do that, right? Sometimes you got to just do Nightmare on Elm Street and then not talk about anything else that came after it. Or Friday the 13th or whatever. But the end of the film is ambiguous. We don't know if that's, Mike waking up from a dream and then still having a dream with the tall man, or the tall man was real and all of the explanation that was part of that, the dwarves and the crushing and the other dimension was actually all real, right?
Yeah.
So it's ambiguous.
Yeah, and the way I took it was the nightmare aspect is a good way of explaining away all of the nonsense that had preceded it.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, if you're just having a nightmare
a lot of nonsense.
And it's like, oh, like, I have this friend that died and now he's a dwarf, right? Well, like, suddenly you're in a different dimension. And you get out of it, and you're like, yeah, like, they're crushing people into dwarves because of the gravity and the heat, right? And it's like, it's such a perfect nonsense sentiment. Like, none of that makes any sense whatsoever. But that's kind of how dreams work. It's like it's this mix of real world logic and nonsense. So like the way I take it is, and kind of informed by the director, Don Coscarelli, what he said about it is, it's just like this kid is just working through his fear of death. And he's having these nightmares.
Yeah, and also And also the mourning and the grief for a 13-year-old. That's the biggest takeaway that I got from this film was that it's an examination of how a 13-year-old might actually deal with tragic deaths of close family members. Because it's revealed in the end that Jody died in a car accident, which cars in the film are a big part. That they're a big visual element. There's a lot of stuff that happens with cars. Not only the car that you were talking about, the muscle car,
the Hemi-Cuda,
but the Hemi-Cuda, but also that Mike is the one who fixes them. So he's trying to fix.
Yeah, he's fixing he's fixing the car.
Died in the car accident.
And while he's in another like what the hell kind of element, he's fixing the car. One of the doors breaks in and drops the car on him, and he's fine. Like he just once Jody arrives and gets the car off, he's just like up and he's fine.
Yeah, and that's when bad acting proceeds to occur.
So I'll say this about the kid that plays Michael. I think he is convincing. I wouldn't say that I relate to him. I didn't feel like he represents every kid. I feel like he represents every other kid. And he's sort of like because it's sort of like when you're 13 and you're imagining, like, wouldn't it be awesome if I just had no parental restraint whatsoever and I could just drive cars and drink and be out all night and go to cemeteries for fun? And he pulls that off, and he has that kind of doughy-eyed kind of quality to him. It's also aided by his look, which I feel like one of the YouTubes I'll give credit correctly points out he has an amazing Farrah Fawcett hairstyle.
He does. I will grant that for mid to late 70s. It was lush.
And the outfit is spectacular. And in general, the outfits in this movie are spectacular. But Michael has he wears the corduroy shirt with the bell bottoms with just a little bit of flair and these pretty cool Adidas. And actually, I think most of the characters are wearing pretty cool Adidas in the film. So it just kind of like I got, to bring up the central concept of like, how do we judge what's good and bad, and how is that informed by psychology? It's like, who's to say like what acting is supposed to be? Right? For me, like, he's not like, is anyone going to mistake him for some better actor? No. But
I mean, they have to be believable. We have to buy into their fear or sadness or whatever. But if it's just like I'm looking at a brick, try to experience the full range of human emotions, I'm gonna be like, no, that's not. It's not really doing it for me.
I bought him as scared, and I bought him as being in over his head. He does like.
I'll grant you the in over his head,
which he probably was, because he was not really an actor, right? So, in that sense, perhaps it's just the fear of acting well that is portrayed in his performance. But I felt like it gave me enough for me to be like, yeah, like he's at least giving off the proper attributes, and I can like. By the end, when he quote unquote wakes up and he's crying as a result of memory of his brother and his parents, I did feel for him. Like, I at least got that out of it.
So we were talking about fear is a big theme in this, right? And you had brought up the scene with the fortune teller. And I think that scene is really important as a setup for the rest of the stuff in the plot and the stuff in the film.
Yes, even though those characters are essentially never seen again, aside from the girl presumably dying off camera, which they never really explain. But yes, it's the introduction to the idea that this kid is fighting fear. Yeah.
So walking down the street and he makes an abrupt turn at this overgrown house, and he knocks on the door, and he's like, yo, is your grandmother home? And the girl that answers the door, the granddaughter, says, oh, well...
Hi, Michael.
Hi, is your grandmother home?
Sure, come in.
Yeah, oh, duh. Of course she's home.
Grandmother, Michael has returned and wishes to speak with you.
And so he goes in for a reading, and he's like, I'm really scared that my brother is leaving.
You've come and wants to know what's bothering you.
Tell her that I,
She can hear you.
Oh, yeah. It's Jody again. I found out that he's leaving.
And she doesn't say anything. And she basically uses her granddaughter as a medium, essentially. She's not dead, but she's using her as a mouthpiece. And he gets this box, as you said, appears, and he goes, oh my gosh, where'd this box come from? But that...
Grandmother has told you before not to worry. If he does leave, he'll take you with him.
God, I hope she's right.
She always is.
There's something else. I'm really scared about something that I did. I was messing around up at Morningside Cemetery, and I saw something. Something really scary.
But everyone else was like nonplussed about it, and he showed his acting range from his pinky.
Michael, Grandmother wants to play a little game.
Wow, how'd you do that?
Put your hand in the box.
Well, what's in it?
Just put your hand in the black box.
So he puts his hand inside, and I think this was because it happened at the beginning of the film with the great soundtrack.
I can't get my hand out.
Don't fear.
Give me back my hand.
Don't fear.
I actually got a little elevated in the heart rate. Then he put his hand in there.
It was simply reflection. Fear is the killer. That's what Grandmother wants you to learn.
I thought maybe it was going to come out, a bone or something like that, or it was going to get cut off or whatnot. And, he struggles for maybe 5 seconds, and then he's released from it when he's told not to fear. And so you're like, oh, okay, this is going to come up again. And it does. It's used for that mostly climax part where he's, sucked into the other dimension, because it's the two prongs create a different dimension. And so, but it's kind of like one of those funhouse mirrors or something like that, where you don't really see what's behind it. It's like reflecting what's behind it or something like that. And so everybody sticks his hand to it, and he's like, oh my gosh, it's a box.
God, Reggie, look at this.
Don't fear.
God, I just grabbed him there.
Slaves. What? Slaves? They're using them for slaves. The dwarves.
Okay, stay together.
Wait a sec, I think I got a lighter.
Quick, light it up.
When you're done watching the film and you're like, oh, it was a nightmare. Man, his nightmare makes a lot of sense.
Sort of. For a nightmare, yes. For a nightmare, it makes sense. Yes, that's certainly true.
So I found that to be one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and it speaks to the idea about understanding fear, right?
Yeah, and I think we should also touch on the orb scene, as it is probably the most memorable, and I think fits with the scene with the theme, as brief as it is. So when Michael is broken into the mausoleum for the first time, he's kind of confronted by someone who appears to be a lackey of the tall man, never fully explained, but that's okay. And
he's referred to be in the script as the Undertaker.
Sure. Fantastic. So he's the Undertaker, let's call him, is chasing Michael. This orb appears. It's just a small, kind of probably the size of a baseball. It's really not very big. It's just a small silver orb. It appears, it's levitating. It's going towards Michael. Michael ducks. So it starts drilling into the head of the Undertaker. And what you see is, like, it opens up on the other side, and you see the blood spurting out. And that's one scene that I feel like the length of time that the blood is spurting out approaches comic lengths. It's a good 5 seconds where it's like, all right, this is. It doesn't, I wouldn't say it's really a gory film in general, and that particular effect is not really realistic looking in any particular way. But I think they get away with it because it's just we're just going to let this go a couple more seconds than we really need to. And then he falls to the floor and dies, and someone infamously pisses himself.
Yeah, so I wanted to add this as a bit of a trivia for this part because I'm waiting to jump in here. The film was going to be X-rated because of the pee. Because nobody dies in movies and pees themselves. And Coscarelli was like, no, it has to stay in. And so he called a friend of his at the MPAA and was like, look, it's just pee. We all pee.
Can we just
keep it in there and get that R rating? Because if this is rated X, nobody's going to be able to see it. Nobody's going to go see it. No theater's going to have it. And I really need it to be PG, or it's not PG, R. And he lucked out. His friend talked to the rest of the people in charge of rating and the raters or whatever. And they overturned that preliminary rating.
Thankfully.
And he got it R. Well, yeah, we wouldn't be graced with it.
Well,
he said with sarcasm.
To bring it back to the idea that you have to get in context. So, I was iffy on that scene the first time I saw it because it is, it's not, that movie has some great looking shots. That is not one of them. But when you look it up, the reason why it's in there is because Coscarelli had a nightmare where that kind of thing was attacking him. And, that's kind of how nightmares work,
true.
Which is just something weird will happen. And that's just kind of it. So I got that little bit of context and I thought, that kind of makes sense. That's how nightmares work. This thing comes out of nowhere and tries to kill you. And it's drilled into your head and spurting out this insane amount of blood. That sounds like a nightmare. So it kind of, so
it sounds like a nightmare to me.
That cohesive theme of the fear and the nightmare makes the train wreckiness of it kind of come together at the end if you are willing to let it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So did you want to say anything more about fear specifically?
Yeah. So I think perhaps the most interesting thing for a couple psychologists to talk about a horror movie is kind of the age-old question of why do we like horror movies? And there's a few views on it. I think one of the big reasons why we're unlikely to reach a definite conclusion is because there just aren't any experiments that use entire horror movies as stimuli, right? Because that would kind of be hard to do. So a lot of what we have is just kind of like speculation and surveys and experiments that will use just like a short clip, which I feel like is not really a great stand-in. So I think the adaptive reason for fear is pretty clear, right? That's not a big mystery, right? There are these things that can harm us, like snakes, right? So we have a fear of snakes, so that when we see something dangerous,
right,
we run, right? And so, like, basically, that's why fear is there, right? So the work on fears, I think, is pretty clear on that. Like, fear is there to grab your attention. It's there to make you less risk averse, and it's there to make you get the hell out of wherever you are so that you remain safe, right? So that's not so much of a mystery, right? The mystery is more like, why is fiction that puts that apparently aversive thing front and center so insanely popular? And probably why is it been so popular throughout time? Like, I would guess that among the first works of fiction created by humans involved like monsters of some sort, right? If not the first art, probably involves like a human running from a giant beast, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of older civilization stories, mythology, Greek, Roman mythology, constantly has monsters and beasts and stuff.
Yeah. So I thought we could we could talk about maybe the one or two most common explanations, and then maybe try to add in some color of our own.
Go for it.
So
who or what is your favorite?
Yeah. So there's a couple of papers by Matthias Clayson, who's been summarizing this, and basically, like, probably the biggest idea is like the idea of perverse pleasure. The idea is basically like a little bit of a bad thing feels kind of good, right? And that applies to fear. It applies to like eating spicy food. And the main idea of it is like, by exposing yourself to a little bit of a bad thing, you're pushing the envelope of what you're capable of and what you're capable of experiencing. And kind of a related idea is the simulation idea. So when you're watching a horror movie, maybe part of why it is in the end enjoyable is because you are like simulating bad things happening to you and essentially practicing how you would deal in those situations. So by watching the full movie,
oh man, people would fail miserably, I think. Geico has a new commercial about
maybe
about them, a group of people who are doing the horror tropes, the standard horror tropes. One girl's like, "Can't we just leave with the running car?" And then the other guy is like, "Are you crazy?
Yeah, so
let's go hide behind these chainsaws."
Yeah, so I don't know how I feel about the simulation idea. Right, like kind of because of what you're saying, right? Because I don't know if it's a good simulation. I will say what I like about that idea is I know for sure I feel myself simulating afterwards, but that's not a good feeling, right? So like
right, it's kind of. I saw a meme just yesterday. Somebody had a picture of a ghost hunter, and it said, "Ghost hunters, turn all of the lights off to turn a flashlight on." So I think that kind of represents this like post hoc simulation.
Well, for me, what happens is, this is why I say, like, I think it happens, but I don't think it's why they're enjoyable. Is, like a couple of days after watching a horror movie, I might get the feeling that like a killer is at my door, right? And that's not good. That's when I questioned, like, maybe I don't like the horror movies, right? So I think the simulation idea is interesting. I don't know if it explains the pleasure, right? The idea, like, does it broaden the envelope of what you're capable of, and like you get to feel yourself gaining autonomy by watching this series of increasingly violent movies. Maybe. I feel like there's something to that. I don't feel like it's a complete explanation. Right?
All right. That's fair.
Yeah,
That's fair.
I feel like it's something. Another idea that I thought was kind of interesting. So there's a patient, kind of like HM. There's a patient SM who had amygdala lesions, and she did not have fear. Right, so she would see snakes and tarantulas and not be scared at all, and she would watch horror movies and not be scared at all. And her feelings towards those things were that she loved them. She thought snakes were great. Experimenters showed her clips of horror movies. Her reaction was like she wanted to know the names so she could go home and rent them. And she loved going to amusement parks, right? So to me, that kind of means like maybe it's not really the fear. Like the fear is maybe what makes it kind of notable and what makes it controversial and kind of gets people in the door. But really what's going on, at least that explains the pleasure, is just like the adrenaline and the imagery and the excitement of the stories, right? And the fear just happens to be like a tangential thing that's there. So that's one thing. Another thing that I thought was interesting, which I was curious to hear your opinion on, is are horror movies actually scary? Right? Because I know you mentioned
I think it depends.
Well, often they're not. Right? And
no, I guess it depends on what subgenre you want to talk about. Right? So, I mean, and this is coming from somebody who is not a big horror watcher. It is probably among the least frequented genre that I watch. So, but I do like suspense films. And suspense films do have elements of scary or elements of horror.
Yeah,
but they're not
it's not
gory.
Quite the same thing, right?
They're not necessarily slasher flicks.
One of the things that's interesting about, like, again, like getting the context of what people like in horror films is I feel like it is the case that most horror film fans, aficionados, are not actually scared when they watch the movies. And I know, like, I've watched enough that I don't really get scared except for one thing, which is jump scares. But the interesting thing about about that is horror movie aficionados don't like jump scares because they feel it's a bit
because it engages our startle response, and that's one of the reflexes that we still have. As humans, we've sloughed off a lot of our reflexes compared to our closest animal neighbors, but we still kept our startle response because it has survival value, and that's what jump scares are 100% stoking. That specific fear that you are about to be attacked. And it's literally the same thing as if, I'm walking down a hallway and I'm like, minding my own business. And then somebody's like, yo, and I'm like, ah, and I literally feel like I'm out of my skin. Startle response. And it's unpleasant, and it's supposed to be unpleasant, which is why everyone hates jump scares.
Except
that's my thought.
The blockbuster horror movies tend to be filled with them. Right, like the most recent, the It Part 2, which I saw a couple weeks ago, would be the most salient example for me. Right, it's all jump scares, and I hated all of them. Right, and I think that's it.
Yeah, it just makes you feel bad.
I think that's one of the interesting things. Like, people that watch horror movies constantly don't want them. But for the blockbusters where they know it's going to get a wider audience, it's going to be filled with them. And for that, my guess is if you're not a horror movie kind of a person, you actually do you want to be able to leave and say you were scared, even if it wasn't pleasant in the moment. But right, it's just because I was promised scares.
It also depends on...
And that's the easiest way to provide it, so that's what you get.
Okay. Yeah. I also think that it helps to define scare, or I'm quote unquote, I am scared, because the idea is, well, what if you're just creeped out by something? So, the Human Centipede... that's my limit. I will not watch that one. It's a horror film. It's part of the genre, but it's a gore horror, and people who watch it leave just feeling icky. And that could be another way that horror films get to the scared part. It depends on how you define it, right? And so, like you're saying, the big blockbusters decide, we want people to be scared by being startled. And so we're going to throw in a bunch of these jump scares. And then they're going to go tell their friends that it was scary. And that's exactly what they want, right? They want people to go see it because they're scary. And it turns out it's all jump scares and people leave feeling uncomfortable. In that case, but yeah, I mean, blockbusters are blockbusters.
It is a genuinely negative experience, but because they expect it, they walk away saying, "Oh, that was awesome."
Right. I think that's valuable, and I think I have to say that would lead me to not include Phantasm as a horror film.
Well, yeah, I mean, so to bring it back to Phantasm, I was not scared while watching Phantasm. There were some creepy images, and the last scene in particular, yeah,
and I think that's my point.
In particular, where the hands pull Michael into the mirror, it's thrilling. I wouldn't say I was scared. Yeah, it's not a jump scare because you see the tall man first, so you kind of know something is coming. Right?
Right.
It's not scary, really, but it does get the adrenaline flowing. So it does, for me at least, it skips right to the positivity.
Adrenaline. I mean, that's fine too. I was surprised by the final surprise, hence my surprise. But at no point was I thinking to myself, this is really scary. I mean, it was set at night quite a bit, and it's supposed to be a nightmare. The fly situation, which was created from the finger.
We didn't mention the fly scene, which is one of the best scenes where, yes, their actors are forced to pretend that the inanimate object in their hands is a dangerous flying beast, when really they just have a felt piece of nothing in their hands.
Yeah. Yeah, so they have to act as though it is applying force to their muscles in ways that they do not want to be forced. And so, my hands are up high, now they're down low, now they're over to the side. That is one scene that I can't really
put a silver lining on that one.
Yeah, it's one of those comical things where you're like, okay, all right, 3 squirts of blood, that was fine. No, 5, 6. Oh, you're still going? Okay. Was this guy supposed to be a minion? Well, he had red blood,
he was human,
so
right?
I guess not. He's not he was human, yeah, because he peed himself when he died. Which makes sense, by the way. Just incontinence upon death. That makes sense.
So kudos to scientific accuracy in the middle of this. Otherwise totally nonsensical.
Exactly. Yeah, we got to keep it
nonsensical piece of work.
and unnecessary.
Yes, there was there is no one that watches. There is no one that a second before it happens is going like, "Where's that urine?" Because I want to see that urine.
Yeah. All right, I want to thank Randy for joining me on this Halloween episode. Ooh, talking about the horror cult classic with emphasis on cult, Phantasm. Randy, while you say goodbye, do you have anything to plug?
Well, I think we should direct people towards our last paper, which is a wonderful journey.
It's a good journey
Through the many of the issues with the very, very popular Myers-Briggs type indicator. And what we try to do in that paper is get people off of the bad ideas and onto good ones, which is, I think, is a good goal for just about anyone.
Yeah, I agree. You should all go read that. If you want a link, I can certainly provide that while I plug my own stuff. Thanks, Randy. I want to thank Randy Stein for joining me on this episode. Until the next episode, thanks for listening.